Venezuela has condemned the illegal entry of a U.S. warship in its territorial waters. American Airlines is set to lay off more than 25,000 employees, a move it claims is due to the slowdown in air travel in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. Humanitarian aid was delivered to the town of Tambura, South Sudan on Thursday to assist hundreds of people fleeing recent violence in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. From the headquarters of Telesur English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, and I'm Katrina Goss. We begin in Venezuela, where Caracas has denounced before the international community the illegal entry of a U.S. warship in its territorial waters. In a statement, Foreign Minister Jorge Arriaza rejected the statements of the U.S. Southern Command, which claimed that Venezuela makes excessive maritime claims over what it described as international waters. The USS Pinky destroyer sailed 16.1 miles off the Venezuelan coast. The Foreign Minister stressed that this action violates international law and was a clear act of provocation, carried out as a result of President Donald Trump's recent visit to Florida, where he met with figures opposed to the legitimate government of Venezuela. And Venezuela has also rejected a report by the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, which questions the Venezuelan judicial system and the economic development of the Orinoco mining arc. In a statement, the Venezuelan government rejected the contents, conclusions and recommendations of the Human Rights Commissioner and stressed that the report was evidence of the double standards and manipulation of this international mechanism by a small group of countries in which gross violations of human rights take place. The Venezuelan government stressed that this practice goes against the fundamental principles of multilateralism. Speaking at the United Nations headquarters in Geneva, Cuba rejected the latest maneuvers of the Human Rights Council against Venezuela. Cuban diplomat Lisandra Astiazaran condemned the intentions of some to use the Human Rights Council and the UN mechanisms to promote a non-conventional war against Venezuela. The diplomat made reference to the report of the High Commissioner for Human Rights on Venezuela. Representatives from Russia, China and other nations also questioned the politicization of the issue of human rights and called for an end to unilateral sanctions. In Bolivia, the promotion of military personnel carried out through a de facto government decree has sparked a wave of condemnation from the legislative branch. Through a supreme decree, the de facto government of Denounces promoted a group of officers without the approval of the plurinational Legislative Assembly. Defence Minister Fernando Lopez is considered to have exceeded his powers by pushing for the promotion of military personnel to the highest rank and disrespecting the legislative branch. In May, military officers demanded to be promoted in violation of the Bolivian constitution. Ecuador's health ministry reported 49 new COVID-19 fatalities over the last 24 hours, while noting that over 3,000 other deaths have been registered from symptoms similar to those caused by the novel coronavirus. The death toll in Ecuador now stands at over 5,200. Meanwhile, over 1,000 new cases were confirmed, taking the total to over 71,000. Since the first case was reported on February 29th, health authorities have carried out over 190,000 tests. According to the official data, over 31,000 patients have recovered from the virus. The Ecuadorian government continues to face criticism of its handling of the health crisis, with cases of widespread corruption in the acquisition of medical supplies and doubts cast over the gap between the official figures and the reality on the ground. The Brazilian Health Ministry registered more than 1,200 new COVID-19 fatalities in 24 hours this Wednesday, bringing the nationwide death toll to over 75,000. Meanwhile, the number of new confirmed coronavirus cases reached almost 40,000, with the total now close to 2 million. The southeastern state of Sao Paulo, the country's most populous, remains the worst hit, followed by Rio de Janeiro. Brazil is the second hardest hit country in the world after the United States in terms of both fatalities and cases. Chileans have denounced illegal arrests and the excessive use of police force during mobilizations to express support for the approval of a bill on pension funds. During Wednesday night and into the early hours of this Thursday, Chileans gathered in several cities of the country to celebrate the approval of the bill by the Chamber of Deputies, which would allow them to withdraw 10% of their pension funds in order to face the current economic crisis. They also condemned the limited economic relief provided by the Sebastián Piñera government. Once again, demonstrators were violently repressed by police forces who made several dozen arrests. Also in Chile, the Court of Appeals in Temuco has issued a ruling suspending the eviction of residents of the Campamento Porvenir shantytown. The petition for protection was issued last Saturday by Mayor Miguel Becker, given the violation of the principal rights of the inhabitants of the area located in Pueblo Nuevo. The Court of Appeals ruling reverses the eviction order against 16 families and the demolition of their homes. The affected residents will now have 2 months to prepare their defence. And our correspondent in Havana, Laura Palmero, brings us a roundup of news from the Caribbean region.
Thanks for the contact. These are the most recent stories and news from Caribbean countries. In Suriname, there was elected a new president, putting an end to the long rule of Desi Bouterse.
Last Monday, Suriname elected a new president, Sean Santaki, a 61-year-old former police chief and leader of the opposition that was elected to the office by Suriname's Congress following a landslide opposition victory in the May general elections. Mr. Santaki takes charge of a deeply divided nation and is struggling to contain the coronavirus, which has infected 741 people and killed 18.
And Cuban Prime Minister Manuel Marrero explained about the importance of not having crowds in popular areas.
During the daily meeting to review the epidemiological situation shared by President Miguel Díaz-Canel, Cuban authorities analyzed again the large flow of people to beaches, mainly in Havana and Varadero. The head of government instructed local authorities to diversify the gastronomic options and open new food outlets to facilitate physical distancing. Marrero also insisted on the importance of adjusting transport timetables to avoid people staying late at night at the beach. Preventive actions such as active surveys and rapid tests and PCR tests in real time in those areas with the highest incidence of the coronavirus are implemented in Havana, the only province in Cuba with the highest number of active COVID-19 cases, authorities said. And in Dominican Republic, the Ministry of Public Health reported 1,366 new COVID-19 cases, and the total figure is 47,671 patients. In terms of death, in the last 24 hours, 19 new deaths were reported to reach 929 deaths in the country. Infections were recorded mainly in the National District, Santo Domingo, and Santiago.
And these are the most recent stories and news from Caribbean countries. Let's go back with you in the studio.
Thank you, Laura, and we're taking a very short break now, so don't go away. South. American Airlines is set to lay off more than 25,000 employees. A move it claims is due to the slowdown in air travel in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. The figure represents 20% of the company's workforce. Frontline workers received warnings about the possible job cuts this fall. Among those who may lose their jobs are 2,500 pilots, 10,000 flight attendants and 3,200 mechanics. American Airlines is the world's largest airline when measured by fleet size, scheduled passengers carried and revenue per passenger mile. China's foreign ministry has condemned the U.S. clampdown on Chinese telecom giant Huawei and also criticized Washington's human rights record by pointing to systemic racism in the United States.
I think what it does has anything to do with the war clean. What it does is genuine dirty tricks and dirty play. From where does Secretary of State Mike Pompeo get us confidence to talk to China about the human rights? If he really wants to speak about it, I think he'd better ask George Floyd and the ethnic minorities in the USA. what they think about the human rights is our situation. If Mr. Pompeo is sincere, we can refrain from imposing visa restriction on him. We welcome him to visit Xinjiang and have talked there with people of ethnic groups to find out what they think of him. I can introduce him to the few Agar friends.
Badly hit by the coronavirus pandemic, Spain paused Thursday to honour the tens of thousands of victims at a state ceremony, which saw the attendance of top European Union and World Health Organization figures. The memorial took place barely 3 weeks after Spain ended its state of emergency. Since then, there has been a surge in new coronavirus cases, with health chiefs monitoring more than 120 active outbreaks. Presided by Spanish King Felipe VI, the memorial took place in a square outside the Royal Palace in the presence of bereaved families. So far, the coronavirus has officially claimed more than 28,000 lives in Spain, making it the 7th worst hit country in the world.
Este acto no puede reparar el dolor de muchas familias.
This act cannot repair the pain of many families who were not able to be next to their loved ones in their final hours, much less attenuate the sadness of their absence. But we hope it can do justice to their lives, to their contribution to our society, to their memory. We are not going to forget any of those who lost their lives in this painful moment of our history, because memory is a duty. That is the best homage we can give to them, being united in remembering them and building together the country they would have wanted to share.
Firefighters in the Italian city of Palermo have worked through the night, searching for people that were trapped in their cars in a flooded underpass after a violent rainstorm. Some drivers and passengers left their vehicles and swam to safety. Sicily's police said they had received no reports of missing people, but rescue efforts were ongoing. At dawn on Thursday, firefighters brought in pumps to drain the flooded area below the underpass. The heavy rain saw at least 1 metre of floodwater gathering in underpasses and lower parts of the city. The German health minister offered statements before the launch of an informal EU health ministers meeting, emphasising the importance of Europe gaining independence in terms of medical equipment and research.
We want to focus above all on the issue of strengthening the European institutions, the ECDC, the European Robert Koch Institute. This will also help the small countries in particular, as colleagues from the smaller countries have made clear. For example, those who do not have a Robert Koch Institute, they say they need more expertise, more opportunities, more information at the European level to be able to act in such a crisis.
The president of the European Central Bank urged EU leaders to do their bit and quickly agree on a recovery plan, as central bank governors held back from topping up their pandemic stimulus package for the Eurozone.
For the European leaders to quickly agree on an ambitious package. In order to reach its full potential, the European Union Recovery and Resilience Facility will need to be firmly rooted in sound structural policies, conceived and implemented at the national level. But certainly from our perspective, we very much hope that the RRF in the amount of 750 billion euros that comes on the top of the 540 billion euros associated with the 3 programs already decided and approved by the European Councils, that will come to support the recovery and to look into the future with a view to greening and digitalizing the European economies.
Croatia's president has appointed Conservative leader and current Prime Minister Andrej Plenković as the Prime Minister designate to form a new government following parliamentary elections earlier this month. Plenkovic's ruling Croatian Democratic Union won the most votes on July 5th in an election held while the latest European Union member faced a renewed spike in the coronavirus cases. The HD-said party won 66 seats in the 151-member parliament, but has garnered the support of smaller and minority groups to form a majority. President Zoran Milanovic on Thursday granted Plenković the mandate to form a government after he submitted 76 signatures in support. A pro-Western party in North Macedonia is poised to try to form a coalition government following a narrow election victory. The Social Democrats, led by former Prime Minister Zoran Zaev, declared victory on Thursday after receiving 36% of the vote, with 94% of ballots counted according to official results.
Почитувани граѓани, почитувани представници на медиумите.
Dear citizens, the election is done. The results are confirmed. The Republic of North Macedonia continues on the right path, safe towards the EU. I congratulate each and every citizen who, regardless the world pandemic, has come out to fulfill their civil obligation and their constitutional right to vote. Every voter is a winner of these elections. Everyone who took part. The winner is the Republic of North Macedonia. Our country showed that rightfully is a NATO member and rightfully it is on the beginning of negotiations for EU membership. As citizens and as a country, we showed again our European values. We organized free, democratic, fair and European elections, as it should be for a state that is waiting for the talks for its membership into EU.
Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison on Thursday ruled out the prospect of the country attempting to eradicate the coronavirus, describing it as a risky strategy. Australia initially enjoyed similar success to that of neighbouring New Zealand in suppressing the spread of COVID-19 in the early weeks of the pandemic. The strategy has succeeded in New Zealand, but just as Australia was lifting its lockdown restrictions, breaches of quarantine controls led to community transmission of the virus in Victoria State. Morrison said Victoria's daily high on Thursday was a concerning setback, but an Australian eradication policy would be more expensive.
The Victorian situation is very concerning, but as I think the Chief Health Officer in Victoria was remarking today, they are, I think, hopeful that what we're seeing is those figures starting to level out. I said yesterday that I thought this would still be at a high level for some time, but as the effects of the lockdown, I think, kick in, then hopefully we'll see those new case numbers fall. And so, yes, it is a big setback in Victoria.
And we have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. Humanitarian aid was delivered to the town of Tambura, South Sudan on Thursday to assist hundreds of people fleeing recent violence in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. The humanitarian convoy loaded with food and supplies was escorted by a battalion of Ethiopian peacekeepers and military liaison officers. Tambura in the western Equatoria state of South Sudan has offered shelter to thousands of refugees who were forced to flee their homes. Meanwhile, the total number of COVID-19 cases reported in South Sudan stands at over 2,100.
For food, they distributed maize, cereals and oil. This distribution was for 15 days. But now, according to the report, that the situation has gone back to normal, and all these IDPs have returned to their places, and there is no any insecurity anymore.
The biggest challenge we face during this patrol has to do with the road infrastructure, which is very poor. The rainy season has made it even worse. With a single trip, we had 11 vehicles that broke down, but thanks to our mechanics on board, they fixed them and we kept rolling.
The Egyptian Foreign Ministry has demanded urgent clarification from Ethiopia following conflicting reports on whether it has started filling the reservoir of its giant dam on the Blue Nile River. Ethiopian state television had reported that the filling of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam started on Wednesday, a day after talks of Egypt and Sudan on the hydroelectric project came to a deadlock. However, later on Wednesday, Ethiopia's Minister of Water, Irrigation and Energy denied that the country was filling the reservoir, saying water levels behind its wall had increased naturally due to seasonal heavy rainfall. The two downstream countries have been seeking a legally binding deal on the operation and filling of the dam before the latter begins.
Seasonal rains could start filling Ethiopia.
The African Union is seeking to coordinate virus vaccine rollout across the continent. According to the head of the AU's disease prevention body, John Nkengasong, as soon as a vaccine for COVID-19 becomes available, the African Union will coordinate its distribution on the continent instead of individual negotiations between manufacturers and countries. The official also stressed that the AU is encouraging local manufacturing of vaccines, and should a good vaccine candidate appear, the organisation will ask for intellectual property transfer in order for it to be locally manufactured in Africa.
There's an available vaccine today, about 7.8 8 billion people in the world will be in need of that vaccine. So that manufacturing will need to be decentralized as much as possible. And we are very confident that there are groups on the continent that can manufacture, which is different from producing a vaccine.
The African Centre of Excellence for Genomics of Infectious Diseases has been at the forefront of the fight against killer diseases such as Ebola, Lassa fever and now COVID-19. The force behind the lab is Professor Christian Happy, who has a strong commitment to helping young African scientists reach the top of scientific research. The lab's 52-year-old director has already set a standard in the battle against the novel coronavirus by devising a low-cost test for the highly contagious disease. Happy founded his lab in 2016 at Redeemers University in Nigeria. Since then, nearly 1,000 scientists, most of them Nigerians and others from West Africa, have passed through its doors to gain top-level experience in biochemistry and genomics.
Vous voyez, nous, on a fait le séquençage du premier virus de Covid en Afrique dans ce laboratoire-ci en 48 heures. Et ça n'a pas été possible. Même en Chine, ce n'est pas possible. Ou en Europe, il n'y a aucun laboratoire qui n'a battu ce record. The natural resources. The wealth of Africa should also be seen in the viruses, in the parasites, and in its natural biodiversity, which includes, microorganisms. And then we should use it effectively, not just as a way to cry to the world that we are infected, but as a way to show the world that we can develop solutions, not only to protect Africa, but also to export the solution to protect the rest of the world.
India is now the third most affected country by the coronavirus pandemic in the world, with more than 35,000 new cases confirmed in the past 24 hours. The country has now reported over 1 million cases and a COVID-19 death toll of over 25,000. Health authorities highlighted that more than 600,000 patients have overcome the virus. The most effect continues to soar. However, according to experts, the official figures underplay the seriousness of the situation.
The antibody test for COVID-19 is a simple blood test, and what we are doing here is an automated CLIA platform that tells you the quantitative IgG value of the COVID-19. So this test is suggested and advised for people 2 to 3 weeks after suspected exposure. So it is basically a surveillance tool and not to be used for diagnosis. So from an epidemiology perspective, to judge the herd immunity that has developed in the population, obviously to also guide the public health policy makers, this is actually a huge help in getting to know what percent of the population has been exposed and is unlikely to get infected again.
Come to the end of this news brief, but you can find